Well, hello, writers. Welcome to episode number 273 of How Do You Write? I'm Rachael Herron, and I'm freaking out that you're here today because today I'm talking to Renee Nicholson. And this is a show about using writing as medicine, as actual medicine. And I could have talked to Renee for another 6 or 7 hours, I swear to God. It's so good. Okay, so hold on to your hats. That is coming up in much lower news, just news that's happening around here. What is going on? Well, I have been continuing to revise, replenish. It's working. Some epiphanies that I've had about the book are working, and I'm getting really excited about publishing it. You may have heard me talking about this before, but I really want to self-publish this one. I had talked to my agent about perhaps taking it out, and I may have one more final conversation with her about it. But I have been having some success with A Life in Stitches, which is the memoir that I repackaged, republished when I got the rights back this year. I put it up, and by I mean my assistant Ed did all the publishing stuff for it, and we put it up a couple months ago. And it was an okay cover. I did the cover myself, and I'm okay at covers. I'm better than the average non-graphic designer at doing covers, but I wasn't totally confident with it. And Ed, who always tells me the truth, Ed never stopped. He's like, could you maybe work on something that isn't so clip art looking? And I was like, I know, right? That's the thing. It's such a cute cover, but it looks like it's clip art. Those of you who don't understand a reference to the clip art 90s and early 2000s, you're really missing out. So I played with a bunch of other covers, and I tried something that I have never tried before. I tried using the evil Facebook, because Facebook is evil. Let's just say that. I tried using Facebook as a place to test my covers. You can do that if you put ads out there and you put up 6 or 7 ads for 6 or 7 different covers. If the ad is identical, and if your ad set is identical in all ways except for one, which is the cover of your book, it's an automatic way to find out. It's this amazing, inexpensive way to A/B test, to market test a cover. So I put up a generic picture of hands knitting, a cute picture of hands knitting that I got on a stock site, and then put up the different covers. And over the course of about 6 days, 2 were clear winners, not the original one that I had up there. And then after a couple more days, one was the clear winner. So we changed the book cover, because we can do that in self-publishing. Excuse me if you're watching on the YouTube, there's something in my eye and I don't feel like pausing. So we changed the cover. We got the audiobook cover made and up and starting. So that's in production, or actually it's with Findaway right now, trickling through to all the other vendors. And I know that Audible via ACX will take forever. And I'm really hoping it goes live before Christmas, because that would be great. Then I'm waiting to push this out to my readers as the 10-year anniversary edition with extra bonus content until the audiobook is live, because the audiobook is what they've always wanted. And as you know, if you listen to this, I spent a while doing this audiobook myself, and I'm really proud of it. Okay, but here's the thing. Here's where I'm going with this long-winded story. That ad started to sell copies of the book, and the ad is still selling copies of the book. The ad is pushing sales so that it is now number 2 in knitting. It hit number 1 for a minute. It hit I think it's at number 3 in LGBTQ memoir. It's at number 9 in creativity. Oh my God. This is where I've wanted this book to be. And I'm not spending a lot on ads. What it's doing, I'm spending between $25 and $50 on ads a day, which is why I never do this, because it's low. That is low in terms of spend on Facebook ads. And I don't want to give Facebook my money, but right now I'm happily giving Facebook my money, because it got onto these lists, and now it is just kind of selling organically, and it's selling a lot of copies. All of this to say, I want to do the same thing with Replenish. or whatever that book ends up being named. Because it's working. It's working. God knows that when Rachael jumps onto a bandwagon, it crashes. So Facebook will probably be taken out of, like, if you hear that Facebook has died, that was me finally running a Facebook ad. But I don't know. It's kind of fun to play with the marketing of it. I'm having a good time with that. So that is what I've been thinking about right now in terms of Replenish as I revise it. Also getting very excited about writing the next novel. And what else? I feel like there was something else I needed to share with you. I'm pre-recording this, so I don't know if there are any slots left in 90 Days to Done. But if you have been on the fence, you can go check it out. It always sells sold out when it sells out. RachelHerron.com/90 Days to Done. And if it has sold out, you can always put yourself on the list that is right there to be notified first next time when it opens. So that's all that's happening around here. It's been fun. I have been having fun and getting things done and having incredible guests on the podcast. Oh my gosh, I have more to come. I'm really backed up in the podcast right now. I'm almost tempted to start releasing them twice a week so that some of the people I have talked to don't have to wait 3 months before their episode comes out, because sometimes this is time dependent around a book launch that they're having. So I don't know what I will do with that. But today we get to listen to Renee. I hope that she helps inspire you the way she did me in reminding us that our books matter and that writing matters, and that the words we move around on the page matter in such a huge, huge way. So please get some of your own writing done. Come find me on the internet. Tell me how it's going and enjoy this interview. Okay, my friends, we'll talk soon. Well, I could not be more pleased to welcome to the show Renee K Nicholson. Hello, Renee.
Hello.
It is so nice. I'm so glad to have you. I've been looking forward to talking to you. Let me give you a little brief bio. Renee K Nicholson splits her artistic pursuits between writing and dance with scholarship in narrative medicine. I don't know why I wanted to say it narrative medicine, which I would love to talk to you about. She is associate professor and director of the Humanities Center at West Virginia University. An award-winning writer, her books include two collections of poetry, Roundabout Directions to Lincoln Center, and Postscript, a memoir and a memoir-in-essays, Fierce and Delicate, essays on dance and illness, and the anthology Bodies of Truth, personal narratives on illness, disability, and medicine. So welcome. Today, I kind of want to talk to you a little bit. I want to talk to you a lot of it about writing, but Fierce and Delicate is something that is so exciting to me. And we're going to come back to it. But first of all, I've seen it described as a fractured memoir in pieces. And I am passionate about memoir. I teach it, I write about it, I write it. Could you tell us what that means, a fractured memoir in essays?
Sure. So I attempted at one point to write a linear-ish memoir, right? I mean, as much as memoir actually is linear. And so, it didn't work for me. I didn't remember things in that way. So then I was like, well, let's play around with essays. And I had written one essay that I thought I was going to expand into the memoir, and that didn't happen. It just worked better in its form. But as I started writing these pieces, and some are very short and others are really quite lengthy, what I realized is that I did have a through line, the same way that sort of novels and stories work, where you have like sort of the organizing principle. Like I had the through line. What I didn't have was just one approach, and that some things kind of stayed with me, sort of like an old family film, right? You get to see things sort of unfold a little bit over time, and other places were really like a Polaroid, right? Or it's kind of a quick.
That's a good way to say it.
You get into it, and here's the thing, and it develops, and you move on, right? But they were connected, and that they were telling the story of a certain part of my life, and really two parts of my life. The dancing part and then the post-dancing part. And so fractured also felt like the right way to describe it, because I had this one way of being in the world. And then I was diagnosed with a chronic illness, and I had a totally different way of being in the world. And that was like a fracture point for me. Now that I have a little wisdom to look back on it and to see like that sometimes the things that we fill into the break in a fracture is actually really beautiful and interesting and meaningful.
Oh, I
So,
love that. I also love this idea of the fractured narrative, but still having the narrative through line. That is something that I believe all good books need, apart from some, two in the world, high literary, that don't, just are put together in whatever way. But I just put down a very famous memoir, which is told in a linear format, and there was no narrative through line. This person did not change or grow or experience in any way. And I put it down about 75% of the way through, because I was like, she's not going to catch up. And I think sometimes we get really married to this idea of it has to be linear, because after all, that is what we know. That's how we move through the world. We start at A and end at Z. But to take it apart like that, kind of deconstruct it and then put it back together with that narrative through, like, was that as satisfying as it sounds?
It really was. And what I realized too, and I love that you're talking about this because it's so fun to kind of like unpack and untwine. Our like we go through life in like start at A, end at Z, but our memories are governed by way different logic. And I would find things from earlier parts resurfacing later. And there was that kind of back and forth, because our past selves are always going to inform our current selves, and probably somewhere in there are hints to our future selves. And when you start to see like in especially in revision where those touch points are, and sometimes I'm like, okay, I need to develop this more, and sometimes I'm like, no, you need to just leave that alone. Walk away from the touch points that emerge from the writing itself, because that is your memory being smarter than you.
Oh, I love that. I know we're just diverging from everything right now, but
That's
how do
good.
you feel as a memoirist? Because this is something that really freaks me out, that they have kind of proven that every time we touch a memory, we are affecting it in some way. We are changing it a little bit. As a memoirist, how do you feel about that?
I actually feel pretty good about it, because
Oh,
that says
good.
my imagination is intact, because every time you come to something, whether it's your own memory, whether it's your favorite book, whether it's music, right? You're experiencing it slightly different each time, right? It's never quite the same. But somehow we've gotten in our mind, like it's only going to be truthful if you can tell it from the exact moment, the exact way you lived it when you were 7, right? And I have thoughts about when I was 7, and they are different now than, when I wrote about them 10 years ago, and they will be different 10 years from now. And none of that is my 7-year-old self, and all of that is my 7-year-old self, right?
Blowing my mind. The
Well,
problem that I've had thinking about this whole thing, you just kind of solved. It's the whole thing. You can never step in the same river twice, because the river has changed and you have changed. And there's nothing wrong with that. That is the way it should be.
right. I think sometimes this is why, like, hanging out with some of my friends, I work on a college campus, and I have a lot of friends that are scientists, right? And scientists are great because you think they're going to be like super, super discreet, and they never are. I love that about scientists. And they, affect me as a writer in wonderful ways, right? But if you talk to physicists about time, like, you know, um, you're going to go on a wild ride. And even like biologists, right? Like biological time is way different than linear time in a lot of ways, right? Two similar organisms can have very different trajectories, right? And they're like, yeah, this is what happens. And we study this and understand it kind of more on a continuum, right? And then you get into, the memoir world, and it's like, oh, it's gonna be, and you got to get it right, and you got to whatever. And I'm like, well, right from where? Right? At what point in the timeline? Right?
That is so much more of an accepting way to look at all of this work we do, rather than this hard and fast judgmental way. I feel like as a memoirist, I have sat in that spot, and I see my students a lot sit in that spot of judging themselves for not getting it exactly right. That's really, really beautiful, Renee. You're freaking me out. This is so good.
I love that, you're talking about your students, because so much of what we're doing, we then impart to our students. And when we kind of give them permission to swim around in it a little bit, we're actually also giving ourselves that permission, which is, also really useful. And I also am like, is it still nonfiction if you are trying to imagine what your life could have been like if things had turned out different, or what your life might be like in some future? Because we think about those things in our actual real life, right?
Daily.
We wonder and we unpack, and we like, create the alternate timeline if, we're a movie, and, why can't we write about those things if they are actually informing who we are right now? And to me, like, that's why maybe that's why the fractured memoir works for me. This idea that, things can be discrete and whole together.
I feel like more of us should have scientist friends for all of these reasons that we're talking about. They can be discrete and whole together. One of my astrophysicist friends is like, every time I talk to her, she helps me see the world in a more holistic way. Not in a more scientific way, but in a more holistic way.
Well, and, I think that the scientists have something in common with, like, Keats' idea of negative capability, and this idea that you hold things in parallel, right?
Can you explain negative capability for those who have not had
English
class for a while, which is one of my favorite Keats things.
So here's going to be like Renee's lay term, negative capability, and all the poets are going to come out and be like, you totally get that wrong. But, I think what he's getting at is there are things we just can't always explain in the world. And sometimes those things seem wildly in conflict, and it's okay to have them both together. That's Renee's wildly.
I love that. Everything doesn't have to be explained. Everything doesn't have to fit together. Everything doesn't have to fit. Contradictions are allowed.
Right.
In my world, contradictions are encouraged.
Right. It's something that I wrote about illness in the book, and it's something I've talked about a lot just with people, and thought about a lot, is this idea, like a phrase commonly used, a cliche, is everything happens for a reason. But really, most things happen beyond reason, and it's really us figuring out what to do with it, right? We impose reason on things.
This seems like an excellent place to move into my question for you, because I'm absolutely fascinated with this. Can you talk to us about narrative medicine and the way you have used it in your, perhaps like where you came to it and how you use it now?
Right. Yeah. So narrative medicine was something I was doing before I even knew what it was. And that was, really giving voice to an illness experience, right? And also understanding that by giving myself voice, it means like a whole voice, not just the role as patient. Like, I'm a whole living, breathing person with all sorts of roles in this life and all these things that I do, and a past that informs me and a future that will unfold, right? And when I first started writing those essays, I had no idea what narrative medicine was. It actually unfolded because I started working with a man who had ALS, and his palliative care physician called me, and I didn't know what palliative care was. Well, I had to Google it, which is, often end of life care, but it's really caring for very significant illnesses.
And it cares for the symptoms in a way that brings relief to the patient. Is that right?
Right. Yes, absolutely.
Not necessarily always focused on fixing, but relieving.
Right. Yeah. It's less about curative and more about, like, how are you going to function every day? How are you going to feel kind of, live in this world with the things that your body is doing, but still, and a lot of palliative care physicians are awesome because they're really into meaning making. And I'm like, I get you guys. I don't get you guys, but I totally get you guys. So this palliative care physician calls me. I'm Googling ALS. This is pre-ice bucket challenge. I'm Googling palliative care. And I'm like, why is this man calling me? And he has this patient. And when he's asking his patient his fears, it's usually all medical stuff, right? Or everything's going to hurt. Am I going to be in pain? And this man says, I really don't think I'm going to get to finish my memoir. And his reasons for wanting to write a memoir were not like the typical writer reasons. He wasn't a writer per se. He was just somebody who had lived a rich life, and he wanted to leave that for all the people he wasn't going to get to know. He wanted to share his story in his own voice. And that compelled me. So I said to this palliative care physician, I don't know if I can help you, but I have to meet this man. So I start helping him, and I'm just sort of figuring things out. And then I'm like Googling all the time again, like writing with patients, writing with dying people, writing with ALS. And I kept coming back to this concept and this program in narrative medicine. And it actually came out of Columbia University, this like amazing woman. Okay, talk about like, I feel like a slacker now. So she's a general internist at Columbia, and she starts
no pressure.
Right there, bar set, right?
that could be it.
Right. But she starts taking graduate classes in literature because she loves to read, and ends up also earning a PhD in literature. She's a Henry James scholar. It was like, right. Mind blown. And she started to see that the things that she was discussing and reading and researching and talking about and the literature side was influencing how she was working in the clinic. And she started to collect people around this idea, and she named it narrative medicine. And I love the way she describes it, because she says the care of the sick unfolds in stories. That made sense to me. I was like, all right. So I get on a plane, I go to New York City, and I go to this weekend workshop. And then I'm like, where has this been? Like, it just, really gets me. And so I start, I return to Morgantown, West Virginia, where I live, and I help this man finish his memoir. And I get really close to him and his family. He was such an interesting man. And one of the interesting things about him is he was the associate dean for medical education at West Virginia University School of Medicine. And so they have this big memorial celebration of life for him. And the family asked me to read from the memoir.
Oh, wow. What an honor.
Yeah, it was really touching. And they felt like they couldn't. And they were like, you were there, you read from the memoir. So I'm in this big auditorium, and it's standing room only. And I read and I look up, and it's just a sea of white coats, right? And everybody in their little, and clearly, touched many lives. So then people start reaching out to me with emails that in any other scenario would be creepy. Dear Renee, you don't know me, but I know you. I was at Jamie Shelway's celebration of life. Right. And so he has this book, and the family decided to self-publish it so that we could really keep it in his voice, because the reasons that it was there were so pure, and people wanted it. They wanted it in their hands. Right. And so people are getting his book, and these doctors start reaching out to me. Well, could we do this with cancer patients in our infusion center? Could we do this with patients with HIV in the Ryan White Clinic? And so I'm like, well, I don't know. Let's see if we can, right? So I start writing with all these different patient groups, and I start working with clinicians of all stripes, like occupational therapists. They are awesome. They totally get narrative medicine. Some nurses, lots of physicians, and from emergency doctors to infectious disease. I mean, the palliative care folks have a soft spot in my heart. They
Yeah.
really get it. But I start connecting to all these people, and I realize that so much of my own writing has been an act of narrative medicine. So of course I do like the thing that, the type A personality does. And I'm like, I'm going to go do a professional certificate in narrative medicine. So,
I'm already
my
thinking it in my brain. Like, how can I do
yeah,
that?
it's an awesome program. And it was so cool because I'm in these classes and, I'm a writer and I'm in there with, a chaplain, a pulmonologist, a cancer doctor, a critical care nurse, a cancer nurse, like just this cool collection of people. In the courses, I mean, I miss taking the courses because they just were just so, it showed me a whole other side of writing. Like we don't think of our writing as being in service to others, but it totally can be, right? So, and I will tell you, when you're writing with patients and you're helping them to write their voice, so it's first person, but not from your perspective, it is a masterclass in point of view,
Oh,
right?
I bet.
Like words I wouldn't use, but I can't.
Right.
If I change that, I materially change the story, and I can't do
Yes.
that.
And it has to
And
be in their
then,
voice. They own
right.
this. They own this story, and that's part of the medicine part of it, right?
Right. It's having the validation of the stories. And, when I worked for 2 years, sort of embedded every Wednesday in the Cancer Institute and in the infusion center there. So much so that, the patients would be like, "Where's the crazy little writer lady?" So, if I had to be gone for a week or something, and so it became like so much of like what I was doing all the time. And I was writing these, and I would think very deeply, because when we speak we change tense without thinking about it. And when we relate a story, our dialogue tags are all different and everything. So what do you change so that it's readable on the page, and what do you keep so that you are honoring that story that you have, right? And so I would always bring the stories back and talk to the patients and ask them if they wanted to edit anything. And only a handful ever wanted any edits. And it was usually like, I forgot to add this. I was really amazed. But the doctors who use these, right? And the doctors are using these, like in the infusion center, they have palliatives work with patients on advanced directives, which is the care that you want to receive if you can't speak for yourself. And a lot of these get reduced down to like DNRs and really like just basic stuff. But these really, really savvy palliative care physicians, two that I worked with, Dr. Carl Gray and Dr. Monica Holbein. They're just amazing at this, and they really get a rich sense. It was actually Dr. Gray who I started with. He started reading these stories, and he was hoping to have all these clinical outcomes, and we're excited, like, oh, what a cool merging. One day he calls me in my office, and I actually went to our department secretary, and she thought it was my doctor, and it sounded urgent. She's like, "What's wrong with you?" I know, right? And I was like, no, it's the person I'm doing this study with. So I get on the phone. I'm like, "Carl, what's up?" And he's like, "Renee, these stories are just so beautiful. I didn't know they were going to be so beautiful."
You are going to make me cry.
Yeah, everyday stories, right?
Yeah.
Bus drivers and heavy equipment operators and truck drivers and homemakers and but beautiful stories. I mean, it really pointed out how beautiful the ordinary is too. I mean, that was like when students say, "I don't have anything to write about," it's not the what, right?
Yeah.
Right? It's that voice you bring to it. It's the meaning you make from it. And these folks, like, they had meaning in their lives, right?
My friend Cami Ostman runs the Narrative Project, and she always talks about there's the what, and then there's the so what. And
right.
you are inside this. So you're inside the so what. So I could talk about this project forever, and I actually want to
Right.
hang out afterwards, and I want to talk more about it for a second with you, if you don't mind. But let's
Sure.
get back to you and your writing.
Yeah.
How, you know what, let's skip over a couple of my questions and then go into the craft tip.
Yes.
Could you give us a craft tip of some sort that has maybe this at its core?
Yeah, for sure. So one thing, as an undergraduate, I studied with a wonderful writer named Susan Neville. And one of her first assignments for us was to sit in a public place and just write down dialogue.
Ooh.
Because she wanted us to understand how dialogue worked. And like nobody says like, pass the ketchup, here's the ketchup, right? Nobody says that.
That's the
Somebody
ketchup,
says,
John. Well, Mary, here's the ketchup. Yeah. We don't put their names in every line. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And mostly like we're talking like at cross purposes, like you give me a slice of pizza? Did you know today the mail didn't come? Right. So
Yes.
really sitting and listening and capturing, real snippets of dialogue is super, super helpful craft tip. The single best thing that helps me is one that I use in revision. And I really feel like our own sentences tell us a lot about where we're at with a draft. And so I have 4 different colored pencils usually.
Ooh,
And
I'm already tingling.
I know, I love the visual aspect of this. And when something isn't quite working and I can't suss out why, I just underline all the simple sentences in one color, all the compound sentences in another color, all the complex sentences in yet another color, and then a final color for compound complex. And usually if something's not working, one of those is like dominating. Like if it's simple sentences, I'm like, I'm not really getting into it, right? I'm just saying short declarative things about something.
Right.
If it's too much compound complex, I probably haven't like clarified my idea and I need to like figure out what that is. And it's like syntax will tell you so much about your thinking. It's crazy, right?
That is so interesting. I've never even thought to do that kind of highlighting work.
Well, and okay, so you go back to that memoir that's like super linear and take a paragraph that isn't really speaking to you and do the same thing, and you'll totally know why it's not sitting with you.
I'm sorry, we have to finish the interview, so I need to go back to what I'm working on and just do this. I have highlighters with me. I don't have colored pencils, but I have highlighters. That'll work.
Yeah, highlighters were great. And when you do it with your students, it's so visual. And I usually just say one paragraph. Let's just do one paragraph that's causing you heartache. And it's amazing what they find. And the balanced ones will have a balance of all those kinds of sentences.
And the balanced ones don't bother you. They're just there, and they're living on the page. That is absolutely gorgeous.
They found their equilibrium, right?
Yes.
Bring it back to the scientists.
Oh my, exactly. I love this. What thing in your life affects your writing in a surprising way?
Gosh, there are a lot of things. My dog has like an immense influence on my writing. First of all, if she's sitting here with me while I'm writing, it's usually a good writing day. We're both at peace. She reminds me to take breaks. A dog gives you structure. They have to be fed. They have to, you have to do different things for them. So my dog actually plays a huge role. And just like that emotional comfort, like writing is so solitary. That's definitely one of those things. I started teaching ballet again after having surgery, and teaching ballet ignited my essays in a whole different way. Like I was back in the studio. I was smelling the smells. I was hearing like the weird scratches of music. I was, the feel of the floor, like Marley, which is the stuff they put on dance floors so that, you don't like kill yourself or fall over.
Is it like rosin in a way? Or is
kind
it
of like, well, you can use rosin, but like the Marley itself it's just a very specific kind of flooring, and it has like just a little give underfoot, so like when you jump you don't kill your knees and hips, and so it has that, like you have that feel again, and the tactile feels of things, in a dance studio. Like it all came back in a very significant way. So I'm like, I have things to say.
Plus, when you're teaching, you get that gorgeous bonus that you have to rise out of the moment and be above the moment and trying to describe what you want that student to find inside that moment. And it just
Right.
brings it all home for you as a writer.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, my sweet spot as a dance teacher is the transition from soft shoes to point shoes. And that put me right back in the moment of that transition for myself, and seeing the things that my students went through that were similar or different than when I went through. Like now they can YouTube everything. They know all of each other. They know all the variations but they know them. Like, I know this part of Sleeping Beauty and that part of Swan Lake, like not the whole of Swan Lake or the whole. So you kind of have to work with them on like narrative structure, really. But it's really interesting, like some of the different, but some of the things just stay the same. The judging of yourself in the mirror, the judging of yourself against your peers, the weird way you understand, like, this is my friend, but also my competition, all those things, right? And so I'm there watching it again as a teacher, helping to shepherd, these young dancers through it, and also, writing about it because it's coming flooding back.
Let's skip backwards for a moment, because now I have to ask, I can't skip over it. What is your writing process? Because how are you doing all of these things? You are teaching literature, you're teaching dance, you are doing the work with narrative, medicine. Like, how does this all fit into your life? You've got a dog. There's a coronavirus,
Yeah, it's a very cluttered life. And at any one time, one of those things can kind of jump to the fore and then recede back. Like right now, I haven't been teaching dance as much with COVID, especially in the early going. It just wasn't safe with having, an autoimmune condition. Just was, and then other things cropped up and filled the void. My writing process is interesting. I try to be a very workaday writer, and it doesn't always work out, but the voice is always in my head, get to the page. And so I just take a notebook with me everywhere. I always handwrite early drafts. My entire book started off as, pen to paper drafts.
Wow.
I admire people who can draft on the screen, but it's not me.
Yeah.
So, and in a weird way, it kind of fits my life because, you have 20 minutes here, you want to capture something, but I also do work in some very deliberate, like writing retreats. Anytime they'll have me, I go to Barrel House's writer camp and, just have 4 days of like, and I bring my notebooks. I may bring my computer too. And sometimes I don't even turn it on because I'm just drafting. Once I have a draft, it kind of follows me. I kind of tote that around too, right? Like I feel like portable office. As a dancer, I had a dance bag. Now as a writer, I have a writer bag.
Yeah.
So, and I just, like revision and I are good friends. It's like 20 revisions feels like the right amount usually. Maybe less, maybe more, but a lot of times, like the first revision happens from notebook into Word, or then I'm printing it out again so I can physically edit that way. And
that's what you're toting around in the bag. Yeah.
Right. Lather, rinse, repeat. Right. So when I do allow myself, and I try to do them pretty regularly, some sort of retreats, I sometimes do them with other writers where we like go together and just like write for hours and then like have a like stupendous lunch and then write for hours and then hang out in the evening and do that for like 3 days, someplace that is not our hometown.
For me, that's the best case scenario, because then you can be honest. Then you have to be honest. Like they're writing, I'm writing. It's that container of everybody else writing. Otherwise, I have gone away on writing retreats before and just, like watch TikTok. So
right. Well, I went away for this writing retreat, but it was Shark Week, and I had to know about epaulet sharks, And
I felt a little blocked. Right. No, but if your friends are there and they're all writing, you don't get to be blocked. You just get to
Yeah.
Right.
And so these ones that I've done in the summer have been really, really great, because then I feel like all fall, those are the things that I'm revising. So then I try to do something like late fall, winter. So all spring I am revising, and you know, my writing process is taken on a very seasonal, cyclical
Love
kind of
that.
cycle. Yeah.
It sounds like it would feel wonderful. Okay, so what I would love to ask you, what is the best book you've read recently?
That one's a really hard one, because you're like, books.
I
But
know.
okay, so one I have to like has been just following me around, and I keep telling all of my writer friends, and especially ones that teach writing, Matt Salis's Craft in the Real World.
Oh, I haven't
Oh
read
my
it.
gosh, such a
Really?
good book.
Gonna
Yes.
go insta buy it.
Yeah, so Matt is he's really taking to task the writing workshop and some of like our crazy notions about craft, and
Good. I
then
take that to task frequently myself.
yes, and he's really replacing them. And so Matt writes a lot about his adoptee story. He was born in Korea and then adopted by white parents in the US, and he grapples with that, and he really presses on you know our ideas when we come to the page, and especially in workshop and we're reading other people's work about race, about gender, and gender not just like male female, but
Yes,
LGBTQ
all
and
genders.
so on. Yeah. Ableism. It's the first book where I ever read about ableism in the workshop, and I was like, oh my gosh.
Wow.
Yeah, right.
I cannot ever hear that discussion. I've never heard that discussion.
Yeah, no, you don't have it a lot. So his book, but he's so smart about it, and it's beautifully written. I mean, it's a craft book that's beautifully written. So I'm like, oh my gosh, so big fan of that. JT Hill was just on our campus, and he has this wonderful memoir, Blind Man's Bluff, and he's just JT reminds me that it's okay to tell a heartbreaking story and be ridiculously funny at the same time. And I love that about him. And he's such a giving, kind, sweet soul. I just can't even say enough things about the book and about him.
Oh, awesome.
I have an advanced copy of Body Work by Melissa is it Phoebus?
Oh,
Is that how
Phoebos.
she's
I love
Phoebus.
her work.
I love her work too, but Body Work is another one of these craft meets kind of memoir, kind of creative nonfiction, right?
I'm dying
But
here. Dying.
it also just hits. I mean, I don't know that if she's ever done work in narrative medicine, but like it hits the narrative medicine. Like I'm like thinking about who at my institution I can get together to like bring her in and do like a workshop with her, and then have her do a reading, because and with like doctors and other people. Right.
Yes.
That's like in my head what I'm thinking. We'll see if I can make it happen, but I'm loving this book. So I'm hoping also. I haven't done a book review in forever, and I have to do a book review of this book because it's so good. It's just
I'm gonna find out who her publicist is and see if I can get her for the show and get an arc too, because I didn't even know it was coming.
So she has, if you get on Twitter, she posted something on Twitter about getting arcs. So
okay, great.
Find her on
I will
Twitter.
also buy the book. It's just that I wanted it.
Right. Yeah.
Now.
No. You do this too, where like you have like the book that you can mark up, and then you have, and sometimes that's an arc and sometimes it's not. And then you get like a nice version because you like the book so much. You don't want to have like your weird marked up copy.
I totally get that, but I don't. I love a bedraggled book. I just love my bedraggled, like every page is turned down. There's flippity flappity stickers everywhere. One book I'm reading right now, I just picked it up and the cover is curled because it got a little damp. I'm like, that is it. That's what I want. I want all my books to look like that.
Yeah, those are the loved books, right?
Yeah.
Those are the ones like, oh. But I also love to have books signed by authors, and those are the ones like I'm like, okay, I can't touch this one because they signed it, so I'm gonna have this other precious one that's like the hot mess.
I have done that. Yes, because I don't want their precious signature in the hot mess book. Exactly.
Or the sweet things that they write.
I know. Thank you for those excellent recommendations that I'm just going to go get. But now, can you please talk about Fierce and Delicate?
Sure. So, Fierce and Delicate. Wow. So the subtitle Essays on Dance and Illness really kind of tell you a lot about what the book is. But I started off my life really seriously training for a life in classical ballet. And as a ballet dancer, even from a very young age, you're so tunnel visioned, and you don't realize that you're tunnel visioned because it gets into you, right? It's part of you. And so I have a love for dance and a deep connection to it. But also, like, because I came to this material later, I also could start to unpack some of the really concerning and strange things that happen, right? And so the first part of the book is just understanding that life I lived in these kind of discrete moments. And some of them are short essays, and some of them are long essays that tend to be sectioned. So I'm really thinking about discrete moments for sure. But then, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and that really just is not a disease you can have and still pursue professional level dancing. And so, I start to unpack what my life is after that. And then I start to write about how at age 36, my right knee has degraded enough that I have to have knee replacement surgery, which is really strange because it's something that happens mostly to older folks. So people are looking at you like, what has happened in your life? But it also then gave me a bunch of mobility back. And so I start writing about, so I'm not the old dancer self, and I'm not the in the throes of it illness, self. And a chronic disease you're always dealing with. You're tangoing with it all the time, right?
Yeah.
And so, but it was different. And so when I started to realize I wasn't going to be in pain and I was going to be able to do a lot more, I decided to celebrate in the most dancer way ever. I go back to New York City and I enroll in American Ballet Theater's certified training in their national training training curriculum.
You are so type A. I love it. You're speaking my language.
Right. So there's a lot of that. I start, I came back, I did undergraduate degree in English with an emphasis in creative writing at Butler University, and then came to West Virginia, which is where my family is all from. I didn't live here. I came back here a lot as a young person and as an adult to visit with family. And so I find myself in the MFA program at West Virginia University, where I now teach and do other things, and where both of my parents went to school, right?
Wow.
So that, and then, as I'm in the MFA program, one of my essays was handed to the director of dance at the time, and she asked me in to coach some dancers. And then all of a sudden people are asking me to teach dance. So of course I have to go to ABT. I have to learn how to teach this. I can't just rely on my own training, right? So it's just like weird kind of, mishmash. So it like dancing comes back in a really kind of significant way. And one that I could not have, even imagined. And the weirdest thing of all that happens, and one of my favorite pieces to write in this book. So one day I get a call from the dean of the College of Creative Arts, and he wants to know if I can meet with this guy, Peter Franklin White, who claims to have been a dancer in the Royal Ballet, and he lives here in Morgantown. Well, it turns out Peter Franklin White wasn't just a dancer in the Royal Ballet. He was one of the founding members of the Royal Ballet.
Holy crap. And he's in West Virginia.
He died a couple of years ago now, but he was in his 90s.
Wow.
And he started dancing with the Sadler Wells Company, which was the precursor to the Royal Ballet, during the Blitz. And he settled in Morgantown because he was doing a lot of work in Chicago and at the University of Illinois and also in New York. And Morgantown was a very affordable in-between place. So that was a good place to have a house. And it was literally up the hill from me. And like nobody knew he was here. And I walked into his house and
Wow.
there's a picture of him with Rudolph Nureyev and Margot Fontaine in Giselle. Like it's this big picture. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So, and Peter had this wonderful way of being a dancer and no longer a dancer at the same time. And he would invite me over and we were cataloging through his stuff. Most of it went to the Performing Arts Library in New York City. He had all these old books on dance that I have now, and I'm super stoked about. But some days we would have proper English tea. Some days we had champagne. That was Peter. Everybody should have a Peter Franklin White in their life.
It seems like you put yourself out there in a way that you are then contacted and then have these incredible experiences because you have put yourself out there. And then your life has changed because of it in a way.
I hadn't thought about it like that, but I guess so. I mean, I'm trying really hard in my life, I think, just to be open to the possibilities, that rheumatoid arthritis came so early. I'm a young person in my early 20s. I don't really know what to do with that. And I think the lesson that has stayed with me is to be open to the possibilities, right? So maybe that's it. I don't know, but people are fascinating. If you like
I find you fascinating. I cannot tell you how much I value our conversation today. And this is a podcast this is an episode that has just blown my mind wide open. And and now I don't always expect that when I'm talking to guests just about, writing. I talk about writing all day, every day. So Renee, thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate you.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. This has also been really, really fun. So thank you.